Now let's go to Google Chrome. Okay. So today should be fairly short. We're just going to go over one last exercise, reflexes, and some of the basic reflexes, and that is exercise 16. I've got a copy of that if you guys don't have your lab manual. I know some of you don't. And I haven't checked. I think everybody's got the spinal cord quiz taken, but if you haven't taken that, remember it's due tonight by midnight. Two more things you should be looking for within the next week would be a quiz on the reflexes that we do today. I'll put that up sometime today before the end of the day, and the second practical, and both of those will be due by next Thursday. The second practical will probably be around 60 questions or so, but it will cover basically everything we've done since we've started online, because I think the last thing we did before spring break was take our practical. So when it comes to muscles, again, know the muscles that I've got on this list here. If you remember the muscle quizzes, I gave you diagrams of A, B, C, D, and E sometimes on them, and I maybe just asked, like, one of those muscles. Be prepared to answer, all of those muscles. So again, those diagrams would be good. And the where is that list? Exercise 13 and 14. Again, the muscle lab PDF. So this is the PDF regarding muscles. The other thing with muscles that I don't think I actually had much of on the quiz that I know is on the practical is structure, like microstructure of the muscles, structure of the sarcomere and things like that. Good grief, it's taking forever to load. I can get this quicker from my hard drive. Well, again, we'll kind of go over that. Actually, let's just do it now. We'll just do the review kind of stuff now. Again, exercise 13, 14, things to know for the brain and cranial nerves. Again, go by that list there. It'll be more of the things you saw on the quizzes, but more so. And again, exercise 15 and 16, a list of things you want to know off of that as well. Again, 15, structure of the spinal cord, things like that. The dura, meninges, meningeal layer, the dura versus arachnoid versus pia mater, things like that. And again, 16, some of the reflexes that you want to know. So let's get my finder. Oh, actually, this is here. Why do I not? Okay. Trying to figure out the share thing and all that. Okay. Do you guys see a bunch of diagrams? I'm not sure what you guys see, and every time I think you guys see something. Okay. So where is my muscle one? Yeah, muscle lab. Okay. Okay. So with the muscles, again, when you open up that muscle lab PDF, I know things that are on there is this diagram here. You want to know the difference between the muscle fiber versus the myofibril versus the myofilament, things like that. Remember, the muscle fiber is the cell. The term fiber has different uses sometimes. If we talk about collagen fiber, that is a protein, a string of molecules is really big. But a muscle fiber is the entire cell, especially when we're talking about like skeletal muscle. Remember, the muscle fiber is full of these myofibrils, these arranged bundles And the myofibril is really where you start to see the sarcomere. Okay, the sarcomere is part of the myofibril. And again, the sarcomere is just basically defined by Z disc to Z disc. Okay, that is your unit of contraction. So the muscle fiber is made up of myofibrils. The myofibrils are made up of myofilaments, and the myofilaments are the actin slash thin filament and myosin slash thick filament. So you want to kind of know that arrangement. Um, I didn't really ask too much about the ultrastructure makeup and how the contraction happens. That's a lecture thing. You do want to know this diagram here, the parts of the sarcomere. Um, the way I always remembered it, if you know actually what I and A stand for on the I band and A band, I means isotropic, okay, which means basically it means it's all the same. Remember ISO is the same. So within the I band, you have one type of filament. You have just actin. Okay, I'm not talking about Titan. Titan's the green spring-like thing. We don't even mention that in the lab. I don't know if your lecture manual talks about it or not, but as far as actin versus myosin. In the I band, it's isotropic. You have one type of filament. In the I band, as the sarcomere contracts, the I band shortens. Okay. The A band is anisotropic. It's not all one. So the A band is the area where myosin and actin overlap. And basically, the A band, if you notice, is the length of the myosin thick filament. Okay, so the A band does not change length when the sarcomere contracts. The two things that change length when the sarcomere contracts is the I band and the H band or zone. When I knew it, it was the H zone, but that gets smaller and the I bands get smaller as that. Remember, it's not the fibers don't change length, it's the amount of interdigitation between those two fibers. Okay, that's the way I always kind of think of contraction. So you want to know the I band versus the A band versus the H band slash zone. The M line is just this midline on the myosin that keeps the myosin fibers all lined up, and the Z disc is where the actin attaches to. And again, the sarcomere, the sarcomere is defined by Z disc to Z disc. Okay, and remember the I band, if you actually look at it, it kind of overlaps two sarcomeres. So just again, kind of know those and be able to recognize thick versus thin filaments. Again, the thick is the purple myosin, and the thin is the actin. So know this diagram on figure 11.5. May have a question. I don't know if I got a question or two about the connective tissue, but again, the muscle and the nerve, the connective tissue are very much the same. The endomysium is kind of surrounds the entire cell. I don't think it's actually labeled here, but the endomysium is just outside the sarcolemma. The perimysium surrounds fascicles of muscle fiber, and the epimysium surrounds the entire muscle. And it's just the same with the endoneurium, perineurium, and epineurium when we talk about nerves. The way I always remember them is endo is inside. That's the kind of like the smallest unit. Peri means more around, so it surrounds the fascicles. And epi, it means more upon. So if you're trying to decide between peri and epi, epi is the bigger of the two. It's a bigger scale. So the epi is more outside of the perimysium. I don't think I have anything about isometric versus isotonic contractions, but and again, I don't think I have any shapes. I had those on a quiz. I think there's enough with the actual muscles themselves. And again, I mean, this guy is good. It's and kind of like the quizzes, I tend to focus more on the trunk muscles and the muscles of the upper arm and upper leg. I don't think I have any of the hand or arm. I mean, some of those it's just a bit much for what we're doing. Definitely know your groups, know what muscles make up the hamstrings, what muscles make up the quadriceps, and what muscles make up the rotator cuff. And again, what I would recommend, not so much the face, but let's see, just as an example, you get down here with the trunk. it wouldn't hurt to read this little blurb at the beginning of the table. Okay, that always helps out, and that's where I got some of this. And again, your abdominal muscles, you want to know what's deepest, what's most superficial. Right on the midline, you've got the linea alba. Just to either side of the midline, you've got the rectus abdominis. And then going lateral to that, you have the external oblique, internal oblique, and then transversus abdominis as you go from superficial to deep. Let's see. Yeah, specifically like, oh, where's the one that talks about the sits, which is your acronym for the rotator cuff muscle, SITS, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. I'm not finding it off the top of my head. Anyway, it wouldn't hurt to, yeah, here we go, rotator cuff. So it wouldn't hurt to again read these things at the top of the table. I wouldn't ask you very specifics like the action and innervation actions and things like that. That's a bit much, but the, the little blurbs here at the top will really kind of help you understand what's going on with the muscles. Again, focus on the ones that are on that list. That's all I would ask you. But you definitely want to review some of the stuff here at the beginning as well, especially the structure of the sarcomere. Okay, so let's go to back to Chrome. And so again, what we're going to look at today is the exercise lab manual here. That is on Canvas. I'll take a look at the reflexes and everything, and somebody just confirm with me a thumbs up or your little column thing. You're looking at exercise 16, the reflex physiology, right? Yeah, okay, all right, thank you. Good deal. Like I said, guys, I just want to make sure you guys are seeing the same thing I am. I had a couple of lectures where I was inadvertently muted for a while somehow, and a couple of things are, what I thought you guys were seeing, you weren't, whether it was this class or my Gen Bios. But um, so we're just going to talk about some of the basics of the reflex. So the reflex, you can have two types. You have your autonomic, which really helps to maintain homeostasis, is the way you can kind of think of that about that. If it occurs to the autonomic nervous system and these activate smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or glands, and again increase your heart rate or increase peristalsis for digestion, or secretion of certain enzymes for digestion, or reducing that if you're in your fight or flight mode. The somatic reflexes, they go to skeletal muscle usually, and you can kind of think of the somatic reflexes kind of help you prevent injury from the environment around you. So those are two kind of very general ways of thinking about reflexes. Components of a reflex arc, you want to know your 5 parts. The receptor is a cytostimulus, and a receptor could be, like you see here, a pain receptor in the skin, or it could be a stretch receptor in a muscle, but something that interprets the whatever stimulus that we're reflexing against. You have a sensory neuron that is afferent, conducts that impulse to the central nervous system. You have an integration center. Now it consists of one or more synapses. Okay, so the diagram they have here is 2 synapses within the central nervous system. This interneuron could not be there, and you just have a synapse. You have a single synapse between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. All right, the stretch receptor we're going to look at is a monosynaptic reflex. You only have one synapse, so you've got a sensory neuron and you have a motor neuron. The quote unquote integration center is just that synapse between the two. Okay, so don't look at this and think every reflex has got 3 neurons involved. Some only have 2 neurons. And again, the motor neuron conducts the efferent impulse away from the central nervous system back to the effector, and the effector is either a muscle or a gland of some sort. So yeah, so here's our monosynaptic. Okay, this is This is easy to do on yourself. You sit and your legs should be kind of hanging, swinging free, and just feel your patella and go a little bit distal to the patella and just give a nice little tap, and you should see your quadricep muscles contract and your foot kick out. That is your tendon stretch reflex, or sometimes called the knee jerk reflex. But that is a monosynaptic reflex. You only have the sensory receptor or the muscle spindle, the stretch receptor in your muscle, the sensory neuron. Again, the integration center is just the synapse between the two, your motor neuron, and then your effector, which is the fibers in the muscle itself. Okay, so um, and again, you have polysynaptic, which is more than one synapse, and some of these can have multiple synapses. Some can carry the signal to the brain, um, but just know the mono versus polysynaptic. All right, so some of the somatic that we'll look at are the spinal reflexes. Um, and these are, again, mediated by the spinal cord. Some take that information all the way up to the brain, others do not. The stretch reflex, again, what we were talking about, that you could cut the head off of something and still get a stretch reflex as long as those neurons were still alive and active. Okay, so you don't need the brain for this. That reflex is only travels to the spinal cord and back. So the two stretch reflexes we've got are the patellar or knee jerk reflex, and again, you probably had that done in the doctor's office multiple times. If not, like I said, it's easy to do on yourself. And really, these stretch reflexes help the muscles to prevent injury. If the muscles detect that they're stretched a little too far, as opposed to letting the muscle tissues tear by being overstretched, this reflex causes its muscles to contract back and to again, the result you see is that muscle kicking the foot out, which, when your quads contract, they extend the knee. The other one is the calcaneal tendon or ankle jerk reflex. You don't see this done as often. Again, they test the spinal cord at different levels. I think the knee jerk is L2 to L4, and the calcaneal is more on a sacral. Whereas I think it's first two sacral segments of the spinal cord. So again, if you've got injury or something, you could detect where that injury occurred by doing different tests. So that's why you have one versus the other. But it's basically the same. You would kind of by hand dorsiflex the foot and tap the Achilles tendon, and you would expect a plantar flexion reflex in response to that Achilles tendon being stretched. And again, just kind of read through these, but as far as the purpose, muscle tone for posture, balance, and locomotion. If you've ever done these little gags where you come up behind somebody and either kind of push them a little bit, you lean one way and you catch yourself like, oh, well, that's you didn't consciously think that, but your muscles stretched out more than normal and they contracted in response to that. Or one of the things I used to see in high school is when you're standing there kind of with your knees locked, and somebody would come up behind you and pop the back of your knee with their knee, and you start to fall, but your muscles contract and catch yourself. That's kind of the same similar thing. Some other spinal reflexes. You have superficial reflexes. Stimulated by receptors in the skin or mucosa. And the plantar reflex is a very interesting one. I want you guys to know this one. I will definitely ask a question too about this, because this is, now I always knew this as Babinski reflex, but what they refer to as Babinski's sign. Um, that is something that you see in babies, and it's kind of an interesting thing. If you guys have in the future, if you have kids later on, this is something I did with my firstborn. And when he was a little, every week or so, I would do a Babinski reflex when he got about 6 months old, and just to see what his response is. Okay, so an adult, if you do this, when you take a thing, you start at the heel and you go out in the lateral part of the foot and you cross you go across what they call the ball of the feet, or this would be your metatarsal uh, phalangeal joints. Um, Now, an adult with a fully myelinated corticospinal tract, again, one of your spinal, the ascending tracts. Uh, a normal response is to flex the toes. All right, cause the toes to flex and move closer together. If you've got damage to the corticospinal tract as an adult, you would see the um, the result that would be normal actually for babies, which would be to extend the toes and the toes flare out and spread out. So when you do this to a newborn, all right, the toes flare out and extend. All right, and because they're not fully myelinated, basically. So when a baby's born, their nervous system is definitely not fully developed. So you do this to a baby, and their toes will flare out and extend, and the toes spread out. That's normal for a baby. As they get older, and again, I did this to mine, and at about 6 months of age, it's like every other time I did it. One time he would have the normal response where the toes flared out for normal for babies response, and then the next time he'd have a normal for adult response where the toes would flex. So you see there was like it was kind of going back and forth as he was um, as his corticospinal tract was getting fully myelinated. But this is something that is typically done in kids. And again, the normal result up to 6 months of age indicates a pathology if you see that above 6 months. So um, that's again what they refer to as Babinski's sign, where you flare your toes out. So that's just kind of an interesting one, that plantar reflex. Um, okay, so another somatic reflex is cranial nerve reflexes. And again, you think about like now these all fall under somatic reflex. Everything we've talked about has been a spinal nerve reflex. Okay, the spinal nerves are the calcaneal, the patellar stretch, and the plantar reflex. Okay, those are all spinal. Now we're going to start talking about a cranial nerve reflex. And these were reflexes that we did often on people who were approaching brain death. When I was working in organ donation, as you see here with the corneal reflex, absence of this reflex is an ominous sign because it often indicates damage to the brain stem. So when somebody is becoming brain dead, that's what you're seeing is death to the brain stem, and the brain stem holds a lot of these nuclei. Again, you think about the thalamus, hypothalamus, pons, medulla, in the midbrain, that holds a lot of nuclei that regulate basic drives of life, regulates body temperature, respiratory rate, heart rate, um, control the corneal reflexes, gag reflexes. The brainstem holds a lot of the nuclei. And again, remember, a nuclei in a central nervous system, that is kind of like a ganglion in a peripheral nervous system. So the nuclei, when you talk about the nuclei of the central nervous system, those are clusters of cell bodies for these neurons, all right, that go out to these cranial nerves. So if those neurons are dying, that is basically indicating the brainstem is dying, and you'll start to lose these reflexes. So a lot of these reflexes, like the corneal reflex, the gag and cough reflex, um, they were consistently testing on people who would eventually become organ donors, because that means they were approaching brain death. So some people, one of the first things they would start to lose is this gag reflex, which tests cranial nerve 9 and 10, the glossopharyngeal and vagus nerve. Um, So when you have somebody else on a ventilator and the machine is breathing for them, they don't cough and expel sputum like normal people do. So you have to suction the trachea, or the endotracheal tube. Yeah, the ET tube, the endotracheal tube. So when they suction the trachea, they should see this person look like they're gagging or coughing, and you guys have all known what gagging looks like. You kind of contract your shoulders up. Now this talks about stroking the uvula, and you see the mucosa on either side raise up. But there are external signs that you can see as well. But the gag reflex is usually one of the first ones that people would lose when they start to suction, and they notice, oh, okay, they didn't look like they were gagging this time when I went to suction the tube. They would report that. The other is the corneal reflex, and this is the let's see, do they? Yeah, touch the person's cornea with a wisp of absorbent cotton. So usually they would use like a Q-tip, and they would touch the cornea, and you should blink in response to that. Okay, if you don't, then that's again cranial nerve 5, the facial, or sorry, not facial, the trigeminal nerve is the root of that. So your corneal reflex. One of the others, I can't remember what cranial nerve it tested, but one of the others that I've never tested on myself, but they say you can do, is called a cold caloric, where you put ice cold water in one of the ears, and the eyes are supposed to move in one direction or the other, um, or you can put warm water. But I've always heard that that the cold water in your ear is really painful. Um, but the gag and corneal reflex, just know those two as testing the cranial nerves. So those were again all somatic reflexes. So the one autonomic reflex that we've got is a pupillary reflex, um, and again that's where you shine a light into the pupil, or into the eyes, and you'll see the well, the iris, actually, the pupil, remember, is just a hole, but the iris diaphragm, you'll see that close down. All right, that's something typical that I think one of the first things the police use when they're doing a sobriety check on the side of the road is shine a light and see if the pupils constrict or if they remain dilated. Again, uh, being under the influence of certain drugs will cause the pupils to stay dilated even when a bright light is shined into the pupils. So the normal reflex, um, when you're in a relatively dim room, your pupils should be large. Um, Shine a light into one pupil, and it should immediately constrict, or reduce size and diameter. The other thing is what they refer to as consensual reflex, which means if you shine the light into one pupil, both pupils constrict in size. So that's kind of a situation where stimulating one side of the body um, causes a reflex in the other side of the body. And again, we've got these terms. I think I introduced these at the very beginning: contralateral and ipsilateral. Contralateral means it responds. Basically, contralateral means the opposite side of the body. All right, so you see a response on the opposite side of the body as the stimulus. Ipsilateral means the same side. Um, so it's just that's the one pupillary reflex, or the one autonomic reflex we have, is the pupillary reflex. Okay, and really, that's, if you just know those, that will be good for this exercise. Like I said, this one was going to be fairly brief. So, um, and again, like I said, the other things that you want to kind of review. Um, the exercise 15 to 16 things to know. That's kind of what I'm sticking to with creating the practical, and exercise 13 and 14 things to know as well. So when I'm making this practical, I'm looking at those two, as well as the lab muscle list, the list of muscles. Um, and basically, I'm using the diagrams that I've already made up for the quizzes. Um, so if you review those well, and again did well in the quizzes, or go over the quizzes, I feel like you should be pretty well set for the practical next week. Again, keep an eye out for both a reflex quiz, should be out later today, and the practical for next week. Both will be due next Thursday before midnight. Um, and again, the practical, I'll try to have out today. If not tonight, then definitely first thing in the morning. I've got it mostly finished. But the practical, it'll be about 60 questions, which, if you think about, having, 20 some stations and 2 to 3 questions per station, I think it's about normal. But with the practical, I will allow for backtracking. So it'd be just like the normal class. You get one look at it, and then you can go back to it if you think you saw something that may trigger or think, oh wait, I got that wrong, or something like that. Um, So just, kind of keep that in mind. That's basically all I have for you guys today. If you've got questions, hang out and I'll answer questions, but hopefully that kind of sets you guys up for the practical as far as what to review and what to study. But again, keep an eye out in your email somewhere. You should get, again, I don't have any control of this, but at some point you should get a class evaluation. Please try and fill that out if you can. And I think that's really about all I have for you guys. Again, I will have your grades to your anatomy instructor, lecture instructor as soon as I can. Remember, you don't get an actual grade for the lab. I report mine to your instructor, and he or she figures that out as a quarter of your entire grade. So just kind of keep that in mind. You won't get a actual grade for lab. Lab, I think, is like a 0 credit, and lecture is a 4 credit. So, so I guess being with that, I will